another episode of the Atlantic CIL podcast. I'm your host, Donald Campbell. I'm here with my friend and vice chair of the board of Atlantic CIL, Alyson Bakley. We've known each other for quite a bit, and we reconnected when I started a few years into the CIL, and then we reconnected. So we've been reconnecting ever since, and I'm happy to have her. Hi, Alyson.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
You said this is your first podcast. Go ahead.
You're the man with the resources, so
Yes.
I use you a little much. So.
Yes, no, you don't. This is what we're here for. I always say to people, because they hear our name, Atlantic Center for Independent Living, and they want to come live here. So my tagline is we're a resource support and advocacy center. Nobody lives here, but we are the people you go to for resource to support and advocacy for your disability world. So Alice, let's start there. So what's your disability kind of origin story? How did you get to leading an organization like an Atlantic CIL? What you want to share, what you're comfortable with? So you can talk about kind of your journey and how you got connected to us.
Sure. So I guess I'll just start with, I know some of my story may be similar to others, as like you kind of didn't know you had a disability for a long time and you were just like, oh, that's just an Alyson thing that Alyson has. Yes. So my whole life I kind of had some issues with like heat and humidity. Thought it was due to asthma, which we're still not sure if I have. But during the pandemic, just to keep a long story super duper short, during the pandemic, my husband and I were on a walk. We had trained with Tadris prior, ran a half marathon. I ran a bunch of 5Ks, not very fast, but I still ran. And we were going for a walk right around the street, actually, in our neighborhood. And basically, I had a sudden cardiac arrest, which led to me, I had my Fitbit on, so it was pretty cool to me, cool to science people, I guess. Not that I'm like an official science person, but that I could see. But actually, my heart had stopped on and off for about 45 minutes.
That's concerning.
Yeah, a little bit. So definitely, anybody that wants Red Cross training or CPR training, if my husband and some bystanders were not there, I would not be here. So it definitely does save a life, and you don't need anything but your breath, and the physical capabilities are able to be tailored in any way. But so anyway, again, long story super duper short, I then was hospitalized for a while. I was intubated. They woke me up without all my other medications that I had taken, which I am on medication for anxiety, which now I know is legally a disability. It really depends how much it affects your life, though.
Yes.
So, so they had woken me up with no medication and told me I have a heart condition. And how long have you had this heart condition? And I did not know I had a heart condition. So then fast forward about 3 years, I was the Jefferson Heart Institute's valedictorian, they called me, because I passed absolutely every test. I had no known factors that they could diagnose, and couldn't really find anything wrong with me other than now my ejection fraction, which if you're like a heart person, my heart functions were a little lower than they should be. So I just kind of kept going to doctors and reaching out to resources. And there's a newer disease called it's not newer, but it's newer to humans discovering it, called microvascular disease. And that's actually what I have. So prior to my event, probably what caused my event is about 5 or 6 heart attacks in my small arteries.
Wow. Yeah, and that is such a story that people should take note of for a lot of reasons. But I think some people assume that kind of when you have a disability, you get diagnosed, and it's like really everybody notices it right away and get diagnosed, and we're off to get our services and get our resources. But as you were saying, it took you a while to even know you had it. And did you have this your whole life? Did they know?
So they think with microvascular disease, there's still a lot of new research coming out, but they think you're born with it. Basically, it's your small arteries are either misshapen. The way I kind of understand it, almost like sickle cell anemia, in the way that instead of your blood cells being misshapen, your actual small arteries are misshapen. So they're either too rigid. Think of I have like a cheap hose. I ordered my hose on,
Right. Yeah. Right, like there's that like little crinkle in it where it
Yeah,
can.
yeah. So anyway, any type of like cholesterol I have to be really careful of, and any type of stress can cause a heart attack pretty easily.
All right. So how has your life changed since that day when you and like I think that's such a good story about the value of Red Cross training and CPR, because you're right, it could have been completely different. Like you probably, if Dylan wasn't there that day or you went on that walk on your own, your life could be completely different right now. So how has your life changed since then?
Sure. So I was always like an overachiever, and
True.
really
This
know anything about that, do you, Donald?
is true. It's not good.
And really, worked hard and put a lot of my identity into my education and my career. I was an admissions counselor, college admissions counselor. I traveled a lot by myself, and was also going to school full time, getting my master's. So I was also pretty active. I liked going to the gym. I liked going for walks and running really, really slow. And, all of that really had to change. And I had to have so many times during COVID, we were like a new normal, but I also went through that during COVID. So I really had a new normal of like how much I could complete in a day. My tank, used to be I could fill it all the way up and then run it up to E. And now I can probably fill it halfway and run it to like 3/4 of the way down.
Right. And
Um,
was that transition difficult? Was that, I mean, especially during COVID, was that hard to readjust kind of your own standards and your own expectations of yourself?
yeah, it was really tough. I have written on my mirror, like, you're your own best friend. And like not in a corny way, but to be like, what would you tell your friend? Like, because
Right,
basically I was going through like, oh, I'm so lazy. Today all I did was take a
right,
shower and brush my teeth. It takes me about an hour to 2 hours to get ready. And, I have to take breaks in between like doing my shower and then drying my hair. I can't stand for very long, and just my focus. I have a lot of issues with that. So yeah, it's totally different. And I think I kind of lost my train of thought.
it's all right. No, it's fine.
But,
It's fine.
okay.
I just, I think what you said is so important about how the way we talk to ourselves, sometimes can be so mean to ourselves by ourselves. And,
Yeah. One of the things that I learned is most strangers are actually really nice and accommodating. Most
yes,
people, it's really interesting. And I've also gone out of my comfort zone a little bit since I've had my disability, because, it's kind of to the point where, I'm definitely YOLOing as much as I can, and doing things that I haven't been able to
you
do in
only
years
live
because
once
I have.
for any of the non-cool
Oh,
kids who don't know what that
yeah,
means.
yeah. It's not even cool anymore. You
Yeah,
guys
it
are
was
cool
cool when
too.
we were young.
Yeah, so I've been YOLOing, and just as far as like, taking trips that I may have not taken before, and just explaining to people like, I might need to sit down, but guess what? There's benches a lot of places. And
Right.
if there's not, I will ungraciously sit on the floor and figure out a way to get up without getting too dizzy. And I just take breaks.
Yeah, and that's a great message to us. And just because you may have to do some things differently doesn't mean you can't do them. Like it doesn't mean just because you have a disability that you can never do anything adventurous or challenging, or maybe you can't do them like you used to do them before you knew about your disability. But there are other ways to do things. There's a lot to do in the world. And I think kind of one of the things that you learn when you have a disability is just because it's not the standard way of doing something doesn't mean it's not correct.
Yeah, I think
Um,
my creativity has gotten to like, that's like my superpower now.
yes.
I carry a fan all the time that's like USB battery operated. I like overheat and have hard time like cooling myself down, because basically your blood flow cools yourself down sometimes. So I carry like a fan that's used for like baby strollers. Everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Where'd you get that fan?" And I just feel like an expert life hacker sometimes. And I'm like, "Oh, well, I have to have it or I'd be like passed out on the grass. And it's not a good look." Um, so
Right,
yeah, it's
right.
been nice.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of transitioning to college with a disability now. And now you didn't know about your disability in college, but I did. I couldn't hide my CP. It didn't, it didn't spontaneously come over me. You know, it's good to talk about if you're listening to this and you have a disability or you know somebody with a disability, transitioning to college with a disability can be different. Now, do you know anything about that during your time as a college admissions counselor, and kind of just give us an overview on that and what you think about that?
Yeah, sure. So I did touch on that. There is a law that is a little bit misunderstood as far as like from an admissions standpoint. And we do talk about this often. There's like this theme of like things with disabilities there to help you. And like sometimes it feels like it's not helpful.
Right.
This is one of those instances, again, I have never asked for services as a student, but I've asked for services as a staff member. This is one of those things that I do think is helpful to not have. But so anyway, the state of New Jersey does not allow you to disclose that you have a disability to the admissions office. And that was because I believe it was Princeton University, which, you know, hey, don't quote me. I'm sorry if Princeton is not the university, but just something had come up that, you know, students were maybe unfairly looked at because they had a disability from disclosing that in the admissions process. So until you're admitted, you can't ask about your specific accommodations. But what you can do is you can go to the Office of Disability Resources, and any admissions officer should be able to help you with that and like do hypotheticals, like not even having your name, and be like, hey, I'm, you know, Donald Duck and I have CP, and, you know, what kind of, you know, I use, I'm just making this up, like a mobility aid. And I saw some classrooms are old. Do you have elevators in all your rooms or something like that? And they should be able to, without a shadow of a doubt, be able to help you. It is a little different navigating from elementary school and high school into higher ed, because sometimes we do need to get a little more creative with some of the resources, and you're not automatically followed with that 504.
Yes, I was going to touch on that too. This is a great point. I think people misunderstand this. A lot of times this is something I see, because when you're in elementary and high school, the school is obligated to find you with the disability. Like they're obligated to make sure they're serving people. In college, it's different. I mean, the college is still obligated to accommodate you, but if you don't let the college know you need an accommodation, they're not asking. So it's that reversal. And I think that sometimes when I see students, especially if they come from a pretty decent school and they're kind of in a bubble where all this stuff is just taken care of because it's been taken care of forever, and then they get to college and they're like, well, where's my note taker, and where's and the note taker's there, but you got to go let your disability office know I need this.
And now I'm an academic advisor, and I always recommend to my students, if you do have a disability, register with disability services, get your 504 together. You do not have to use it.
Exactly.
But if you get to a class that's super tough and you do need that extra time, or you do need 5 minutes to get to class, because I think about it all the time when I'm scheduling my students' classes, they'll be like, oh, 15 minutes, that's plenty of, you know, time for me to walk a half a mile. And I'm like, for me, that would not work. So
for me, that would not work either.
So I absolutely would need more than that amount of time. And if I couldn't schedule classes that way, you know, I would need some type of note saying that. And it's so much easier to already have the accommodation. That way the professor knows ahead of time. Again, most people are very well-intentioned. They just, you know college students, and especially for invisible disabilities, I see oftentimes that people feel that, you know, we can overcome what we have because they can't see it.
I always tell people, you know, I'm sick of overcoming. I'm sick of overcoming.
You can meet me halfway. And
like, it'd be nice. I've overcome enough. Can you just give me the note taker, please?
I don't need to work harder because I have a disability. I will meet you at the same level, but I shouldn't have to work harder. So definitely disclosing, you know, that kind of goes for anything.
And I think what you're saying is so important. Like, don't wait till the last minute, like, because it does take a while to get this stuff set up and to get, you know, it's not like, you know, a lot of colleges, it's not like, you know, you ask for a note taker and they hit a button and a note taker pops up. Like, they have to they have to ask people in your class. They have to, you know, find the right person. So, the more time they wait, you have looking for a note taker, because if you register late, you could be getting behind in your notes. So, we don't want you to drown, Allison. I want you to say it early
Right.
and to know what's going on, because, college is also different than high school, and when it's harder to get back up once you get behind. So, not impossible, but the earlier you could do that, the better it is for your stress level. So, and again, if you do poorly in a class, you can't go to your professor, well, I had a disability. So, the professor's gonna say, well, I didn't know. Did you go to the disability office? And it's not gonna work out in your favor. I'm just saying.
No, yeah, you don't want to drive the car before you built it. That's what students never want to come to orientation. Like, never is a huge generalization. Never want to come to
No, it's a fair
orientation.
point.
And I'm like, listen, the first day you got to get in that car and you got to drive around. So we have to get that car ready, and it's kind of like just not taking your car to inspection and expecting it to, run
Right.
smoothly the first day. I mean, you got to
Right,
sharpen.
we want you to have
pencil.
time to work out the kinks. What if you get a note taker and it's not a good fit? What if you get a note taker and, there could be a lot of reasons. What if you thought a half an hour was enough time on test, but you found that, actually an hour would have helped you. That could be the difference between failing a class and not failing a class. So, I hate to be that corny adult, but it's true. Like, we're just trying to help you out. I've done it before, and I go to that office right away. And sometimes, as Allison will tell you, sometimes the office is usually a lot of times not called the disability office. It sometimes has a weird name. So you gotta look for it and ask about it. Sometimes it's called, I know, at Stockton it's called Learning Access, and my law school was called something else. So you gotta look. There is a disability services office. It does exist. So you gotta look for it and ask about it.
And speaking from admissions experience, they should be able to, like, students would always ask, like, oh, well, what do I do with my 504? And as an admissions counselor, I say I can't take it. And then as a really good admissions counselor, I would tell you about disability services, but maybe somebody doesn't. Most admissions counselors should know, if not all, about what the campus offers. They just get kind of nervous, especially in New Jersey, because they don't want you to disclose. And then, if you don't get in,
Right,
it gets
right.
like,
And it makes
really write it down.
It makes sense. It makes sense. They want to keep that clean. So if they do deny you, you can't say, well, why I let them know I have a disability. Does that have anything to do with it?
Right.
So, yeah, so that's just a good note. And yes, then a good admissions counselor should tell you, and a good whoever should tell you. But I guess my big point is, like, you can only control you. So don't assume that everybody knows what they're doing. It could be a new admissions counselor that's never dealt with this in their life. And they're like, we don't have an office. There's an office. They exist.
Yeah, and one thing that I did learn from you, and being like a newbie to these services, is that 1 in 5 people have a disability. So if you're in a classroom with 25 people,
Right.
chances are there's a few people with accommodations, or that might
or
benefit
could
from
qualify, or like you said, hand it over their 504, but maybe having used it, or so don't think you're getting anything that anybody else isn't entitled to either. I know with a disability, and I'm sure you experience this too, us, and sometimes there's like embarrassment and I don't want to bother anybody, and there's that whole thing.
Or like, I don't want it to be easier for me. And the way I thought about it is also, during this time, I ended up with glasses. And I kept telling the doctor that, like, well, I can read what you said, but like, it's really hard to read. And he's like, well, let me give you glasses to make it easier. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, that's what accessibility is about. It's not making it easier. It's just being able to work just as hard as somebody else for the same result. So I shouldn't have to squint and get headaches just to read because I physically can. I should use my glasses. Like, nobody's like giving you an award because you don't use your glasses. That's silly.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I struggle with that too, especially when I was younger. I would say I don't want any special treatment. But then I realized, like, no, this is just to let me compete on everybody else's level. And actually, all I'm doing by not asking for my accommodations or not accepting my accommodations is making it harder for me, which I love what you say. You don't get an award for that. You just, failed that test that you could have passed if you were given an extra hour, because
Right.
it takes you longer because you have a processing disability. So,
Right.
it's just, don't beat yourself up. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask for. It's in the law, and it allows you to, with a disability, if you don't get accommodated, you're at a disadvantage. So it's not fair the other way. So
Right. And I would also say, like, I feel like my experience being somebody that's become disabled, it's like your target gets smaller. So like it's harder. So you're already at a disadvantage, even with most accommodations, they're not perfect.
right,
So
exactly.
so you're still you're still not even on
Yes.
equal playing footing most of the time. But it has been good and bad because of COVID. I've seen things like virtual meetings, which are really helpful.
Yes. Yeah, I'm still that annoying person, everybody at the at the meetings I go to, that's like, let's have a virtual component. Can we have and I love in person too. I'm an in-person person. Like, I get it. There's a definite value to being in person. But I like that option, and I think we've learned, thanks to Zoom and meetings and Teams, there's so much benefit to at least giving people that option.
Yeah, I'm definitely hoping that more remote work options become available, because I think, especially for us with those of us with invisible disabilities, chronic disabilities, my current job has been great with accommodations, but they keep every 3 months I have to ask for new accommodations because that's not the way my job is set up. It's traditionally more in person. And I'm like, well, I'm not curing my stage 3 heart failure. So every 3 months I just fill out the same paperwork. Which would have never even been available to me pre-COVID. But they are working with me great. But like, it is one of those things that, I do hope that the trend goes more in a remote option, at least an option for a couple days a week. So then that way it's just so much easier to explain the little things that I have set up in my house that like not every office has.
Right. And hopefully, it just becomes more commonplace in our culture. And I will continue to push back against people who say it can't be done, or of course, if you're doing brain surgery, of course you can't do that over Zoom. We don't know what AI is going to do after the robots attack us, but there's a lot we can do over Zoom. We're doing this over Zoom, and it makes it so much easier than Alyson, you want to come in and do the interview. So it's just, I really hope we learn that in the pandemic, and I hope that all our fields take advantage of it. What has been the biggest thing most surprising thing you've learned since entering the disability world? What were you like, I did not expect this. I thought this was different.
This is gonna sound cheesy, but I mean, you know me, I'm not like corny or anything, but not everybody else does. Like how, I don't want to say welcoming, but how like accepting people with other disabilities are. It's not, a competition. And when you do like disclose, especially to somebody that does have a disability or has a family member with a disability, they seem to just get it. Like it almost feels like when you're like struggling through college, and if you talk to somebody that's been to college, they're like, oh my gosh, I know what you're going through. Like da. Here's some things I used. Whereas if somebody hasn't gone to college, I'm not saying, that experience
it's
totally
just,
valid and
a different experience.
that they're kind of like, huh? So some people that you're super close to just won't understand the journey that you're on, even though they love you and care about you. And then other people that you just kind of meet randomly through like a Facebook group are going to be like, oh, how was that doctor's appointment? What's going on?
Oh, that doctor didn't believe you had a thing either. I get that. Like, that doctor was completely dismissive of you. Try this doctor. They get it more. Like, and I think that's so true.
Yeah, it's been nice because, as somebody that like I also like, even though my disability isn't visual, I always feel like everyone can tell, like sometimes I sweat or like I need to sit down, and like sometimes I'll just disclose because I feel like everybody knows, and people will be like, oh no, it's okay, like we just thought you were sitting down or whatever. And like, then usually people that do have disabilities, whether visible or not, will like come up to me and say something like, oh, I'm glad you said something, or like,
Right.
here, I'll like sit back and walk with you. Sometimes I need to take my time too. So
Right, yeah, there is, I mean, a lot of the focus goes to the negative sometimes, but there is a lot of positive. There's a whole community out there. There's a lot of great resources in social media, a lot of great groups on social media that you can join for all kinds of disabilities, just to know you're not alone. And I think, that'd be a great place for us to end. I mean, there are resources out there, and there is a community out there, and there's a lot of positive out there, especially in today's day and age. I've noticed there has been a turn, even since I was younger, when the ADA was just passed in 1990 when I was born. I always say for the specific reason that I was being born. That's probably why they all got together, all the
you're
legislators.
like,
But
oh, we see a future law student in
yes,
this guy. We
yes,
better get our act together.
yeah. So but now there is a whole culture of people are like, I have a disability and I deserve my accommodations and I'm here in the community, instead of like, I think especially when we were growing up, and definitely in previous generations, it was like, let's hide it, let's not talk about it. So I'm really excited to see that shift happen. And we'll end on this too, talk about, because you have a disability that, like I have cerebral palsy. People know cerebral palsy. It's one of the fit in the box disabilities. I say people get it. Oh, look, cerebral palsy. But talk about kind of having an unseen disability and what that can be like. You talk about a little, and just give some people some advice on how to deal with that.
So as far as like, your body, I've been in this body for 33 years. And I wouldn't say that any doctors were like absolutely dismissive, but some doctors were just like, hey, this is the way your life's going to be, and we don't know why. And that wasn't good enough for me, especially because my health was deteriorating at that point, and we didn't know what to do to help it, and how I could, move along. Also, like, people ask you, like, hey, for lack of a better term, like, what is your disability? And I
Right.
just had a heart condition question. So I guess knowing your body and knowing what you need, whether you get a diagnosis or not, and until somebody goes through like looking for a diagnosis and not having one, I don't think you can really fully understand how frustrating it is, because even if the doctors are the nicest things and they believe you, there's no like getting to the end of the puzzle.
Right. Sometimes they just don't have that piece.
Right.
Like,
And it's like, what do you mean? Like, I visited every single cardiologist in the Northeast, like, or whatever. So I guess just don't exhaust yourself, but look for answers and make it more of like a game, which kind of sounds sick, but like, I was basically like, okay, this is like SVU, something hurt me, and I'm going to figure out what it was, and I'm going to get that thing back.
Right. And also I'm gonna feel like I'm gonna look at every corner and feel like I tried everything I can to get this answer. Like, all right, I'll talk to that doctor too. I'll talk to that doctor too. And you have found your answers, and you're still learning every day. But I think that's a great thing to take with. I always say you gotta kind of embrace the grind and embrace the journey. And it is unfair and you shouldn't have to do it. But the only way we ever get answers and put these disabilities on the map is by advocating, is by saying, no, that's not right, is by educating people. And again, I'm not saying we should have to. I'm not saying if this was my ideal world, this is how I would design it. I'm just saying sometimes to change the world, we got to embrace it a little bit. I know I was with my dad over the weekend. He was visiting from California. Hi, Dad. And he was talking about how when I was born, the nurse told him I would never hold a bottle and never walk. So just because somebody's a medical expert does not mean they know anything of what's going to happen. So, and I think Alyson knows that too. Just because a doctor said something doesn't mean there's not another doctor who might see it differently. So trust yourself. And I think that's a great thing to end on. Anything in closing, Alyson?
So, I mean, I guess with learning all of this and everything, I have a pacemaker defibrillator. And over the weekend, I did something out of my comfort zone. I took like an all girls trip, and me and my pacemaker defibrillator and I were really tested And just with walking around and doing a little more than I usually do. And everybody always asked me, like, did you name your pacemaker defibrillator? And I never did, but now I did. And her name is Grace. And I
Oh,
think,
see.
you need to have some grace with your disability. And that's kind of what I've come to after. And it took us a long time to get to name each
Yes.
other.
Yes.
But so her name's Grace. And
Yeah, and I think
that's a
that's
big thing.
awesome. And how was your trip? Was it a good trip?
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was something totally out of my comfort zone that probably a lot of times we don't talk about this, but like pre-disability, I probably would have been like, let me save money, let me do this. But as somebody that like cheated death once, I'm kind of like, let me try as many things as I can and get as
I
uncomfortable as
want
I
to go
can.
on a girls trip, but I don't know how much. You never know. So it's like, why not? What's the worst
Yeah.
that can happen? What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, yes. And it was really fun. And I met some people. I only knew one person that was going. So it was definitely out of my comfort zone. But I think, especially for our mental health, we need to do things like that to make
Right.
life worth living and especially for those of us. I think a lot of us, disability or not, have to like fight for every day. And,
Exactly.
you need a reason.
Exactly. Just because it scares you doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And like you said, what's the worst that can happen? You went to a trip, you didn't like it, and you don't go to the trip again. But you ended up liking it. And I love the story about you kind of accepted your disability even further by naming your pacemaker Grace and learning that it's just part of you. So thank you, Alyson, for doing this interview, and it was fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Donald. Really appreciate
All right,
it.
have a good week.
All right, you too.
All right,
Bye.
bye.